Here we go. It is Thursday night. I am Matt. This is Alan. This is Build Your Bottom Line. We are a production of Treadstone Risk Management. A reminder, like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, retweet. Please help us share this out there and also help us with the algorithm so that we rank higher on all those fantastic searches that everyone does. A quick reminder, we are here to help you save money, protect your business and reputation, and help you build your bottom line. How's it going, Alan?
This is an exciting night. We have a professional with us tonight, so they don't have to listen to our nonsense for an hour.
I was going to tell you, you have to be on your best behavior.
I know. I put on a clean shirt. I mean, I am no mustard stains today, baby. We are going pro.
I'm going to put our scroll up on the bottom just so you know how to link up with us and follow our content. A reminder, if you do follow us on Facebook, if you're on the Build Your Bottom Line Facebook page, we do also have a group. We're trying to build a community there, share some information. You can ask questions, get help from other people in the industry, and throw out a funny meme every so often, as long as it's not too crazy, and commiserate with some folks that do kind of the same thing that everyone else does in the real estate industry. So without further ado, I would love to invite on Scott Choppin from the beautiful sunny state of California. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Good to see you guys and be here.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on. So I'll give you, 1-2 minutes, Reader's Digest. Who are you? What do you do out there in Cali?
So Scott Choppin, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called the Urbran Pacific group of companies. And we are a real estate development company that I founded actually 21 years ago, this last March. So we are a company that builds new apartment buildings. So we find empty and underutilized pieces of ground, and we do everything that needs to be done to basically deliver a completed rental housing project. And we have a specific type of workforce housing that we develop, which I think we're going to talk about later. And to finish, I've been in the business for 35 years. My wife, Becky, and I are now married and together for 28 years, and we have 3 kids, 20, 17 going on 18, and 14 going on 30. A girl, our youngest, 2 oldest boys.
You're in a similar spot to me, but I'm a little bit earlier on. So I got 3 as well. The youngest is about 5-6 years removed from my middle child, my son. So you're this close to being an empty nester, it sounds like.
Yeah, we're in the transitionary phase. The first one's off to college, and our younger son will go. He's a senior this year, so he'll go next year. Yeah, in fact, it struck me the other night. I was like, oh. And with COVID and he came home from college, our oldest, so it was like we sent him to college a second time. So we got to get that experience twice, which, frankly, the year we all had together at home was, difficult circumstances, but good time to re-engage with families for sure.
Love to hear that. Yeah. I mean, taking a awful situation and turning it into, family bonding or at least some good times hanging out together that you might not have had. So no, that's good news.
But then we're like, you got to get going.
Yeah, that was great. Now get out of here.
Time to go, right? Because you love to have your kids at home forever, but what was I reading the other day? It's like the objective of a successful parent is to launch your kids successfully, which means they don't, they shouldn't stick around.
Yes. Yeah. No refunds.
Exactly. No do.
All right. I'm going to let you take first crack at this, Alan, because I knew you had worked up some talking points and questions for us. And so go ahead and kick it off with the top that's on your list there.
All right, let's see. Yeah. So let's see. Description. All right. So basically your website talks a lot about this urban townhomes and things like going with multi-generational housing, which I think a lot of people misunderstand what that means. Could you explain what you mean?
Yeah, so urban townhouse, like you referenced, that's exactly correct. And so about 5 years ago, we had a little gap in the marketplace. We've been developing apartment buildings and other residential projects for that 21 years. And we had a little point at which we could pause in the market, and like the market sort of like created a little, I call that flat spot, right? Like little, moment to pause. Lenders were pulling back, equity was pulling back. And so it gave us a chance to sort of look around and like I was what I call a signal from the noise, which is basically you're looking at all the different things that are going on in the marketplace, all the different trends and signals, and you try to like look at what makes sense to work on and what makes sense to leave alone or quit and move away from. And so it was at that moment that we sort of transitioned out of doing like typical urban housing, mid and high rise, small unit studios, right? Gen Z, millennial centered. Because of my background from other companies that I work with, I knew that families, like working class families, was like this interesting place in the marketplace that was underserved. And so we basically created ultimately what became the UTH, or urban townhouse model. And that is a 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom unit type that we build in, anywhere between 15 to 85 unit projects, 3-story townhouse, 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, 2-car garage, nice finishes, air conditioning, but meant to house families that are basically working class families and that are multi-generational, which, we'll talk about in a minute. And really, if you think about it, in almost any urban environment, any metro area throughout the United States, and even I talked today to a guy in Toronto, he thought there's that same need, but there's these working class families that have multiple generations, that they share their incomes and expenses, what I call economic sharing, and that our UTH model was designed to fulfill the need for housing with these families and do it in a way that could produce a more affordable housing option for them, not government subsidized affordable housing, but like just a natural market rate solution to it, and a place that we could build projects and produce profit and yield for our investors. So that's what basically UTH is in a nutshell. And multi-generational is just really like one of the core tenets of the housing type, and economic sharing is practice in these multi-generational families. I mean, they pull the family together and they go, okay, we've got 6 or how many ever people in the family, mom and dad, grandparents, in-laws, adult kids living at home, small kids, depending. And what they do is they pool their resources together, and that gives them a much stronger capability to survive recessions, right? What I call recession resilient. It's a better lifestyle for them. One of the things I've always encouraged about it is that, if a grandparent's at home, when kids come home from school and parents work, well, there's somebody at home for that child to come home to, right? Like versus, a lot of us latchkey kids, parents worked and you came home, you were by your home, latchkey kid. And so we started to like think about this, and more, I knew there was a need for families, but I was like, man, nobody's looking at this space. It's like almost completely uncontested. And so we focused on in fact, this unit type, this 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom is exclusively what we do. Multi-generational is like the core tenet. And that really means 3 or more related generations living together. Although it could be any mix of family, in-laws, cousins, that kind of thing. But that there's a common like shared objective to take care of the family collectively together.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because older millennials and Gen X are that like sandwich generation, right? Like the ones that potentially are going to be taking care of older parents in the same household that they're raising their kids, right? And so that is really interesting that you came to that solution, and it's really not necessarily, I guess I'll use, air quotes. It's not like the typical American solution, right? Like it used to be like, kids would move out, get their own house. I mean, hell, maybe they lived in the same neighborhood, right, with their parents or things like that. But that trend is most certainly changing. I have a question about the cost differential. So what would be the typical like alternative to a UTH for a multi-generational family if they were getting one standalone unit or 2 units? And what does that price look like compared to a single, 5-bedroom unit that you guys are putting up?
Yeah, great question. So what we typically find is we'll pull families out of one unit where they may be overcrowded, right? Like more people in the unit than is like really healthy for them to live a good life. What you described, like, we might have a family that's got two bedrooms next to each other. The guy in Toronto today I talked to, he had a person who like worked, it was like somebody, like a nanny, and her family, one family lived on the 4th floor of a high rise and the other family lived on the 10th floor of a high rise, but they lived like in this economic strain lifestyle. And when they had events, they would go to one unit. Sometimes the units are, maybe, 3 blocks down in another apartment, unrelated. And so, part of the family lives here and part of the family is there. So the metrics are this: basically for a 5-bedroom unit, UTH unit in Southern California right now, we're ranging between about $3,700 and $3,900 a month.
Okay.
And so the way to think about that, depending on how you do the math, I was doing some math today on $3,700, that ends up being about $2.11 a foot. Like, so in the multifamily business, we think of it on a per square foot basis, although no tenant looks at it that way.
Sure.
Like practically they go, what's the monthly payment? How does that compare to my income? Like a car payment, right? Nobody thinks of, car payment divided by horsepower, right? The number is the number, right? But the other way to look at it, which we see in a lot of these families, is they think about it on a per bedroom basis. And this is really where it gets interesting for us. So basically our numbers between, let's say, $740 and $790 per bedroom. That's the rent divided by the number of bedrooms. And then you start to compare that to the market. So in Southern California, your average brand new unit is probably something like $4 a foot. And some are $3.50, some are $6. We have markets in SoCal that are, $5, $6 a foot. High rise, a little higher end neighborhoods. And then on a per bedroom basis, interesting. So, you could typically get, a brand new studio unit might cost you anywhere between $1,800 to $2,250. That's a 1-bedroom. Maybe a 2-bedroom might be in that $2,500 range. So you could do the 2-bedroom, divided by 20, or $2,500 divided by 2 is $1,250 per bedroom. Yeah. And so we're traveling in that like 40 to 50% below market in comparison to those ratios. And I explain it that way because a lot of people go, oh my God, $3,900 a month. That's a lot of money. Yeah. But I go, yes, but you're getting 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a 2-car garage. All these units have their own 2-car private garage, like you would have at your regular house. Central air conditioning, nice finishes, quartz countertops. So we build a real nice product. But we tend to locate in neighborhoods where these multi-generational families already are typically living. And one of the interesting things we found about these families is that they're tightly focused on their family, but they also have deep social connections to the community. So think kids in school, their churches down the road, their extended family lives, in the same community. And in fact, a lot of people who move into our units, they're native of that city. Like we just built a project in a city called Montebello in SoCal. And we had people that, I've lived in Montebello my entire life. And this unit happened to show up and it happened to fit their family, situation and the need. And they were happy to stay there. On average, the commute for predominantly service workers, blue collar, is 10 to 20 minutes. Like these are not, people that, super commute 2 hours to their job. And then of course, in the work from home environment, like that's just accelerated because our units are big and have lots of space. Yep. Although that's not our focus, really families is. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a stark contrast. I know. So both Alan and I are located out of New Jersey, so we're your $3,900
sounds cheap right now.
Yeah, and the perception of California real estate is that you pay through the nose pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
And what's funny is when you compare and contrast that to say New York and New Jersey, it's not really all that much different. I mean, there's a couple of areas, obviously, like you know, LA County and the hills and stuff like that. Sometimes it gets a little, way crazy expensive. But I that's really interesting because I think people also have to understand that it's not like a one income family is now moving into this 5-bedroom and taking on that monthly nut that they have to crack.
That's
There's,
right.
potentially 2, 3, 4 income streams in that 5-bedroom, which is also interesting.
Yeah,
So,
in fact, classic layer families are, again, multiple earners, if I didn't say that before. But, it's often we'll have 3 or 4, 4 roommates and they're all working. And so each individual, earner is making, between, let's say, 30 to 50,000. And these are, rough numbers.
sure.
But when you combine those together, that economic sharing really produces like a totally different situation for them. So now the family's income is, 125, 150, 175,000, which, in the context of, low income housing as people think of it, this is not that. But these families don't have an outlet, right? Even if, if you make 125,000 and you have a family of 6, well, your housing options are very limited. In fact, we find a lot of our families have never lived in a new unit, like ever in their entire lives. Like it's just never been an option, or it never fit, maybe is a better way to say it, for what they were looking for.
Yeah. No, awesome. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Alan.
So I mean, kind of carrying on that theme of the family unit itself. Have you noticed, in Asia and Europe and cultures like that, it's not uncommon for large families to all live under one roof. In America, it hasn't always been that. It's, TV movies have kind of taught us, when your parents are old enough, you stuff them in a home, you sell all their stuff and you keep the money.
Yeah.
So with COVID and with the current economic situations, are you finding that shift from, Asian and European families is starting to shift towards American families, and families are starting to kind of, I don't want to say forced to come back together, but realizing that there is an advantage to being back together?
Yeah, great question. And I think there's several trends that are happening. Some are long trends, some are short term. So the work from home combination together during the pandemic, that's a short term. And I know you guys are going to show the Pew Research link that we talked about before. But really, so there's a couple answers. Historically, and Alan, you're exactly right. Like the American nuclear family is an anomaly in history and geography, right? So if you go back into Civil War United States, you would find that the idea of the nuclear family didn't exist, that people lived in larger family groups. Grandparents would typically live at home. Today, globally, the multi-generational family is the norm, and the nuclear family is, again, an anomaly, although the Pew Research information says that we're in a rising multi-generational lifestyle environment in the United States. So you've got cultural change, right? People who move from overseas to the United States and live this way. I mean, all the time we're working with people that, maybe, we meet people who in the professional environment who come from Hispanic families, and they see this and they're like, oh, dude, totally. This is like my family. This is us. Like they get it immediately. Asian demographic. But you're right. Like in the mainstream culture, the idea of living multi-generationally for some people is sort of like, weird. Like they go, really? I gotta do that?
I love my mom to death, but I love my mom to death. But the thought of living with her all the time, my brain shorts out thinking about that. But at the same time, I could understand the financial benefit of trying to make it work.
Yeah.
A little inside baseball, Scott. It's because he's not married and doesn't have kids, and she asks him 5 times a day when it's going to happen.
Yeah, right. Like, hey, come on, dude. What's going on? Yeah. So there's that, and then you touched on it for a minute. Again, back to this idea of economic sharing, and it is in a way forced. Right. Like if people had all like ultimate, unlimited income, then they would go get this super cool, sexy high-rise studio in, New York and whatever. Right. But the economic realities say different. And so as we go into like more and more economic pressure on individual earners to afford housing and other lifestyle costs on the incomes that they are, in fact, I have a graph where it basically shows, housing costs going like this and incomes are sort of going like this, right? So incomes are stagnant. Now that graph I'm alluding to is a little bit out of date, because I would think we would start to see incomes rising now. but still the rate of change on housing increase is way above the rate of change for income increases. And the gap between those two is really where our product serves, right? To allow economic sharing to fulfill that gap where people can now afford a new unit. One of the interesting things we found, a lot of families that move into these units, they've never had air conditioning, like central air and heat. And so it's a new thing for them to run the air conditioner, right? And one of the things we have is they leave it off all day. And these are big units. These are like 1,800 square foot units. They leave the air conditioning off all day. We're in California, and it gets pretty hot, Southern California. And they'll come home, it's like 90 degrees on the third floor. And then they'll turn on the air conditioning and they run it like just crazy. And then at 9 o'clock at night, they call us and go, dude, the air conditioning's not working. And we go, no, it's working. When did you start at 5 o'clock? How hot? Oh yeah, dude, it was like, 89 degrees on the thermostat. And I go, we go, hey, listen, you got to run it. Maybe run it at 78 or 76, but let it run all day. And I understand the economic, practicality of like not doing it. But I said, I promise you, if you do that, it's going to be way cheaper than turning it down to 59 degrees at 5 o'clock and running it till the wheels are going to fall off. And so it's interesting as we travel into these things that, these families have not had this opportunity. I mean, a 2-car garage and your house. I mean, I never had a garage when I was living in apartments. I don't know about you guys, but cool, like a garage, that's different. So we're sort of traveling in the space that's a gap, and we're in this environment. Both long-term and short-term trends are producing the pressure and the opportunity to supply a new type of housing. I mean, this is why we've gone all in. I mean, we're not doing any other kind of housing than this because we're such firm believers in this, several decade trend of increasing multi-generational living for all the reasons that we've talked about. Like, this is a long-term trend.
So that's a really good lead in. Let me pull up that Pew article right here. And we don't have to go like crazy in depth here because I'll share the link in the comments. Yeah. But just right off the bat, the graph basically shows, what you've been talking about. It's like the 1950s all over again, right? And that trend, I think a lot of you're kind of in the catbird seat because I think a lot of the real estate market got caught sleeping on this, and I'm pretty sure that COVID and everything that's happened over the last 18, 24 months has also probably accelerated this to a certain extent. Am I in the ballpark on that explanation?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, totally. In fact, in the graph that you see in the middle there, the green graph, the low point in that graph, I think, is in the 70s. That was the low point of multi-generational living. So we could say the apex of the nuclear family, right? Where, it's mom and dad and, grandma lives over there and, kids moved out and they live over there, right? And then you can see it's gone back up. In fact, this graph, if I remember correctly, goes through 2016. So it's not even that. I keep wishing Pew would update it. But there's another Pew Research study that basically said we're at the highest rate of multi-generational living since in the last 160 years. And how they have data going back 160 years, I don't understand. But it's Pew Research; they're legit, serious research group. And so I think these just point out to the fact. And in fact, if you look at it, that at the high point of the graph, it's 64 million households. So that's not just people, that's households, like, families or whatever number that they count in their statistics. And I know it's increased even more. Like, I've seen some other studies that described it. And then as you point out, the rate is increasing both for coronavirus and the media, work from home, sort of, come together and under a, sort of a difficult, like environment, right? Like sort of protective, also combining together for incomes, for economic sharing, right? And that's both immediate, like, hey, I lost my job. I'm going to move back in home with you guys, right? In fact, we saw, a lot of the tenants that we had when we were renting, we had a couple of projects that rented right during the heart of the pandemic in 2020 and the end of 2020 and early 2021. And we had a lot of people that were like, yeah, we're, grandma's moving from out of state and, this person's moving in with us. And so they were all related. So, and one of the things to think, these are all related families, maybe by marriage, but predominantly by blood. multiple generations, grandparents, parents, kids, adult kids, young kids, sometimes 4 generations. And that's the immediate, but then we got this long-term trend that you see on the graph, which is, I think, more economic. I don't, I mean, there's obviously culture change in the United States, and, maybe with the sort of recent changes in immigration, that might accelerate. But I think just the economic reality, right? We're in we're in the environment where wages aren't rising to the rate to catch up with it. And you hear it in the media, it takes $50 an hour to afford the average 2-bedroom. And that's right. But what it misses is that there's this opportunity to live a different way. Now, of course, we all know it as roommates, right? Like we all had, you guys probably did, I did. You have roommates and you shared, but everybody was like ready to get the heck out of that as soon as they could. Oh, dude, I want to have roommates anymore, right? I remember that. But also, it's funny when you're saying, Alan, of living with your mom. One of the things that in our culture is like when kids turned 18, it's like get out, like scoot, and you go. Okay, that I understand that, sort of the American style of like, adulthood, get out.
Mm-hmm.
But I also thought, as I work with my own family, it's like, you know what, I'm not going to be that. And not that I'm in, pat myself on the back, but I go, why put pressure on that person to go work a job that they maybe isn't the preferable job, to afford a rent an apartment that's probably too expensive. Like, what is that? Like, that's a penalty. And new generations, Gen Z is penalized enough as it is, like, with all the things that go on today, disrupted economic environment, college debt, college is expensive, maybe college is worth it, maybe it's not. So I'm really like, I was like, I'm a like totally changed person. I'm like, no, actually, I think the idea of kids staying at home to continue to gain knowledge from their parents and shared and take care of each other. And that's like way better. And like, I left my house when I was 17 and a half. I couldn't wait to leave. And then it was like hard as heck to, make $5 an hour. That's how much I got paid in my first job. Yeah. And, I'm sleeping on somebody's couch. Like that's because what I could afford. Right. Fine. I survived, whatever. I got toughened up. And there's a story around that, but I'm like, I'd rather have somebody be, stable, get the better job, have the internship that advances in whatever it is that they need to do professionally as a young person to advance the right career, and be patient rather than taking, a junk job because they got to pay the rent.
Yeah. And as a business owner, I'm a big proponent of entrepreneurship. And the best case scenario when you're an entrepreneur is when you don't have a ton of overhead that you have to float every single month. Like that's how you get locked into a salaried position, and you don't, you're not able to take that risk in order to kind of, start a business or a side hustle or something like that. Yeah. And I think hopefully I'm not speaking too much out of class, but you mentioned student loans. There's also something that's kind of like bookended on the other side too, and that's medical cost inflation, right? And so I think that's also something that's driving older generations specifically to, have to figure out something. And, a lot of times the alternatives are, stay with your kids so that you don't have a high overhead in terms of mortgage and things like that, so that you can pay for a home health aid or something, or a state-run facility or something. And I think most people would agree it's preferable if you can keep the family together, because that person typically degrades really quickly when they're in a facility.
Yeah, we haven't touched on the whole social interactivity, which, like I mentioned about having my older son home during that period of time. I didn't think that would be an effect that we would experience. But now that he's leaving, we're like, oh, even his younger brother, like the three of us would meet for what my wife described as man class every Sunday to, learn about, stuff that men should know about. Yeah. And that's ended and, ended on a good note, but we're like, oh, that's not that won't continue. And so it's like been interesting to identify that social interaction that you lose when you separate. And so that's really, guys, we're in the business to produce profitable projects and take care of our families, make a good living, produce yield for our profits. But I'm so encouraged by just giving the opportunity for these families to live under one rooftop in their natural lifestyle, and having housing that's appropriate for it. And that's why, for me, like, we've gone all in on this. I mean, I don't intend to do anything for the rest of my career, however long that lasts, because I'm just, I was like, wow, this is a really cool thing to be working on. I mean, it's profitable and viable, but it also does, so much for, these families to be able to live a good life, basically.
Oh yeah, definitely. Go ahead, Alan.
Well, no, I mean, I was going to kind of, the other half of what we do here is the construction side of it. And I was kind of curious, with the California market, you being a developer in New Jersey, there is nothing but grinding halt on developments and new apartment buildings, new townhomes, because of the affordable housing requirements. It's just lawsuits out the yin yang around here.
Yeah.
So how do you, being that it's urban, but it's kind of a little upscale urban, what are your, I guess, flags that you have to get around in just trying to get these projects moving?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys will appreciate this, New York, New Jersey. I mean, getting a project approved, like at the governmental entitlement level, is insane. California is like, and then, you put like a New York, right behind it, right, for like difficulty of like doing those things, like zone changes and other, governmental actions that you need. And that's why a lot of people shy. If you talk to people about California, they're like, no, dude, I don't want to go there. That's like, and they're right. They're right. It just happens to be, this is our native environment. Like, we've done it, I've been doing it for, many, many years, and you get really good at it. But also that produces, like, to answer your question, Alan, like, we will choose sites that are already zoned over those that need some zone change or governmental action to reduce the complexity and the time that it takes to get that going, right? Like, we're really strategic about it. Now, not every site, those aren't easy to find. In fact, I tell people that, and they're like, oh, dude, those don't exist. I go, well, they do. You just got to like look through a lot more stuff to find it. And then occasionally you do find a good site where the right price is, that you'll take the time to do the, the zone change and other kind of stuff like that. And we're starting to do, particularly as our projects get bigger, we'll undertake more of that, right? But again, back to what we know how to do. Like, I think I just put it in the context of just a high regulatory environment. You talked about the affordable housing requirements. We have, because a lot of sites that we bought were already zoned, and we just went straight into plan check, producing the plans, permit, plan check, and permit issuance. We avoided that, right? Like, usually the affordable housing comes with, oh, you want the zone change, and we're going to go to city council or planning commission. Okay, they're going to tag you, and California is like, like top, 3, along with New Jersey and New York that way. Yeah. But I will offer this: we've been doing more and more inclusionary affordable housing. So we'll dedicate, say, 10% of the unit count of a project. And under California law, they have something called the density bonus law, or the affordable housing density bonus. And we can actually get relief from different requirements like setbacks and height limits and parking. Like, we can actually ask for reductions in those things to help the design of the project work better by dedicating 10% of the units. So we've been actually doing that more and more, just to facilitate on those projects that need the governmental entitlements to do that. And and a lot of times what we do, guys, is interesting. We really like to get Section 8 tenants into those affordable housing units, because here's what goes on. If you're a family that has a Section 8 voucher and you have a family of 6 and you need, 4 or 5 bedrooms, it's almost impossible to find that unit, right? It's very, that more norm availability is houses. And a lot of, we're barred from discriminating against Section 8 under California law, which is in the last couple of years that came about. But we know the reality is, a lot of owners just discriminated, generally. They just didn't do that. We found it to be, one, we're encouraging to do that. Like, it fulfills a certain, social, benefit to the families beyond just the availability of the family housing. But the what they call I think it's called the turnover rate. But basically, a lot of families will be on these lists for 10 years. These waiting lists to get a voucher, like, super decades long. Yeah. And if you get the voucher and then you can't find a unit that will take your voucher, you have to give it back within a certain period of time, right? Imagine
Yeah.
waiting on a list for 10 years and you're a big family and you need a 4-bedroom unit or a 5-bedroom unit. Like, man, that's tough. And so we've been super enthusiastic to do that. Now the Section 8 families, have a little bit different, way that we need to work with them in the sense that they're, lower income, than even, our regular, sort of middle income families. So the answer, Alan, is partly, we sort of look for sites that don't require it, or sometimes we'll actually invoke it ourselves. But we haven't found it to be a stoppage. I think because we always go in underwriting with the assumption that we're going to end up doing some of that. And we'll underwrite it in the beginning. And then if it doesn't need it, then, that increases the income to the property. Or if we do, cool, like that's how we underwrote it. And that's my background. Like one of the companies I worked with before I started in Pacific, I worked for an affordable housing development company. And so this is like deeply in my background. And so we just underwrite it like without assumptions. And then when it comes up, like, cool, like we already were prepared for it. And like, I'm not sitting here like we're, got the silver bullet answer, but projects.
I don't think anybody does for that. It's a really tough, it's a tough thing to navigate. Yeah. And it's getting tougher and tougher to do because that list is growing longer and longer.
I agree. Yeah. I think we're never going to see less regulation, at least maybe in our lifetimes. Unfortunately, I wish for it every day.
So let me transition to kind of some of the dollars and cents in terms of the investment side of the house.
Sure.
I think I saw, you guys actually have a really decent IRR on these properties.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Is that derived from the fact that you're essentially using kind of like repurposed properties in order to set up these projects? And then are you entertaining outside investors to get involved, or is it mostly just company money that's being put up for these?
Yeah. So, last I checked, our average IRR had increased slightly to 23.06. So when we first started the UTH program in the beginning, we did what I call the demonstration phase. And that was a series of 4 projects where we wanted to prove the model because nobody's done 5-bedroom units at scale, right? And trying to do multiple projects with bigger unit count, that kind of thing. So we did some small and mid-sized projects like as a test bed, like in case something went wrong, we wouldn't be like hung out to dry by our own project. And so that 2306 actually is the average of the completion, rental, and sale and stabilization of those projects. And that's actually the LP. So that was the money to the LP investors after, the splits with us. So very good. The reason for that, I mean, there's, as always, there's several reasons. One of the reasons you described was that the repurposed property. What I describe is this is an A product that's going in B and C neighborhoods, right? So think working class, blue collar neighborhoods. What that does, it allows us to buy land a little bit, less expensively. We don't get like into big neighborhood fights that delay projects for years. So we're a little bit more expedient on time. And, we're not lightning fast. Development is still a challenging, time-taking process. But the real meat on the bones of that is basically we're producing in those rents at that $3,700 to $3,900 a month, a lot of whole dollar income compared to what it costs to build it, right? And that's in the development mode or any investment is you don't want to produce income that produces a value that's, above your cost to purchase it, or in our case, what it costs to build it and, buy the land and build it, right? You want to buy it at, X and sell it at X plus, right? Is the way to think of it. And so what we're doing is the way I think of it is we're at the equilibrium point of maximum density to produce the best income at the lowest cost. And that's the reason why we do this 3-story model, is because it's basically, it produces the most space to produce income, but still is at a cost that, produces a profit, right? Because if you went up to 4 or 5 stories, well, you'd get more units and more density, but it's more costly to build it. So your ratio of cost and income go down, meaning you're less profitable. I could build a really cheap single family house, right? That's super cheap to build, easy, but I can't produce much income with it because it's 1 unit, and that's got the limited capability. So at least in California, under our building code, that 3-story model seems to fit that sweet spot really nicely. And, it is, better than, what I track in the market and colleagues that I talk to. And, development's always, subject to, you're talking about regulatory delays. We're in the environment of like supply chain disruption, inflation. I mean, we took during 2020, we'd moved into bigger projects in 2019 after we finished the demonstration phase, and then coronavirus hit. And so strategically, we said, look, we're not going to take on any more big projects, at least for this near term in 2020, because we don't know what the world's going to look like in a year or two. It's like scary, like March 2020, everybody was freaking out, right? And we just said, okay, so we still believe in the model. It's recession resilient. We know from 2007, 2009, that families naturally recombine in a reaction to downturns. They move back in together. And we could even track in the 2020, we could see that happening, the stories about, people moving in together and roommates and work from home. So we knew the model was viable, right? But we also said, let's not go crazy. So we took on a series of small and mid-sized projects that were like, a couple miles down the road from our offices, really local, a little bit smaller, a little bit more boutique. And we're actually now going through finishing those projects. But it was interesting because that was when we started to experience cost inflation, like real cost inflation in the materials and labor. And actually for a period of time in early to mid 2020, we actually had a huge increase in labor availability because a lot of projects and cities shut down. Like they said, okay, we're not going to build anymore. Coronavirus is crazy. Cities shut down, projects shut down. That freed up a huge amount of labor. And we had one project that like accelerated by about 30% for, more subcontract labor, that kind of thing. But then as we came through like the end of the year and started bidding these projects that we were doing on this interim, I mean, we went, up like a good $30 a foot per square foot on our hard costs in the span of a few months between one project that we bid and another project we bid. So inflation's real. We haven't seen any disruptions in the sense that we can't get the stuff, but I'm seeing little like indicators, we just finished framing a building in Long Beach in our hometown. And like the lumber companies we work with, they're like, dude, we don't have any more I-joists for the floor assemblies in between, the floors in the townhome. So we were had to go hunt around, and, one group had them, and we had to pay $9,000 extra. So we're starting to see that kind of stuff. Yep. And I'm trying to prepare our trade partners to say, look, order your appliances. Usually we could do it, a month or two ahead, and that'd be fine. Mm-hmm. I go, you guys got to in fact, I think we'll be done on this project in probably 4 months. I'm like, you need to start ordering your appliances now. Yeah. And, if we need to ship them to a storage location to get them and have them, because, nothing worse than finishing a unit and you got no stoves to put in your unit for people to cook. You're dead in the water just as much as if you never built the unit, arguably. Yep. And that kind of thing. So we're having to be creative. But it's been interesting because we've been able to keep these projects going through this time period. We didn't stop, and it's been hard in some ways, but I'm encouraged because we're getting new data all the time. Oh, appliances cost this much. Oh, my framing's this much. And, we in fact, our last project we're framing, I joked with the framer, the guy who runs the company, the sub. I go, dude, you and me, we bought the most expensive lumber ever in history. Yeah. Good for us. Okay.
You top ticked it.
Dude, it's and then I kept waiting. I go, let's just wait a little longer. And at some point we're like, dude, you got to go buy it. Now we're going to be stopped if we don't. And then it dropped, right. Sure. All the lumber memes on the internet that we were living those.
It's exactly like buying crypto. You keep hoping it's going to drop so you can buy it, and you find
right.
Buy it now.
Please don't go up. I would love it to go up, but I maybe go down. I'll buy some more.
Yeah. And the minute you buy it at that top point is when it plummets.
Yeah. I would love the price to go up, but I want to stack before it goes up, please.
Yeah. There you go. So that's a whole other episode. But
better not go there. Whoa.
Yeah. We're not financial advisors.
No, trust us. If you see the way we live, we are not financial advisors.
Yeah. you raise a couple of interesting topics, and we've done past episodes on these, and they've come up throughout the last 6 months. Obviously, the cost inflation of lumber, and all the risk management that comes with that in terms of diversifying suppliers in your supply chain, and also the risk management associated with you were used to keeping X amount of dollars worth of input cost sitting in a storage unit or something like that, and now you have to increase that because you're now planning 6 months out, 12 months out, 18 months out in terms of those units. So yeah, that's all really good stuff. Let me ask kind of, let's look more kind of broadly at the California real estate market. What does it look like? Because we've seen the real estate market's been really funny throughout the entire country, right? There are certain areas that are booming because of demand, for demand reasons. The obvious culprits are Florida and Texas with a lot of influx of new population. There's certain areas like here in New Jersey, certain zip codes they have low supply, and that's chiefly the only reason why that price inflation is happening. So what does it look like in California? Is it just as disjointed? I know California's a really diverse state, one of the biggest in the country. So what does that market environment look like for you?
It disrupted would be a good way to describe it, which sounds like, what you're describing. So, a bunch of different trends. So I'll try to just, a little riff here, but yeah, we saw a lot of exodus out of Silicon Valley, right? As people were released from their geographic locations and working. At the time it was like, you guys read this, they're like, oh, everybody's moving to the Midwest, small town, rural, they're getting out of town. And really the reality of it was they moved like 2 or 3 cities over. That's something we tracked, because for us, people moving out of the city in the urban metros, like that's a problem for us. Like we go, no, we can't do anything about it, but we certainly track it. And what we found was people would leave like a downtown San Francisco or the peninsula of San Francisco, and they'd move like 3 towns over, which was more suburban. It's not really rural, but you could say, you got the central city, and then you got 3 or 4 rings concentrically around it. And they would be moving out to those neighborhoods, which in fact is exactly the neighborhoods that we travel in, sort of these, what I call urbanized suburbs. So they're originally were suburbs in the 50s when the growth was moving through that sector of town, but now they've been there for a long time. They become a little bit more dense, a little bit maybe more commercial corridors, right? So they're not new suburbs, and they're not the green grass and golf course type master plan type suburbs. These are like hardened, urbanized suburban locations, and that's where people were working, and then where they're living or moving to, and then working from home. And that was partly to not be too far away from the office in case they had to do that. But the reality is a lot of people, they don't want to move to a small town where there's nothing going on, particularly somebody who's millennial or Gen Z, man. And, look, not to say that they didn't, but I actually I read a study from Zillow, and I may not get the numbers exactly right, but they profiled, or they surveyed like 500 people, right? And it ends up like 450 of them moved within 20 minutes to 1 hour of where they original were, right? And they do this partly where people search on Zillow to move, to buy or rent. And then they had 450, and then 25 moved to Texas, and the rest were scattered all over the place. So statistically, that movement to the rural really was not true. Really, they're moving to the suburban, periphery of a major metro. Now that's stopped, or at least stabilized. And then, in fact, I'm going to, on our Saturday newsletter, I clipped a couple of articles where they're actually starting to see now a return of people from these locations back into the city. I think one is the health the pandemic is at least moderating, whatever we're going to moderate. I think people are less fearful. I also think there's this, some companies are like, dude, you got to come back, right? I mean, it's been cool to work from home, but some companies require people to come back. And I think some people are just like, dude, it's there's not enough cool stuff to do. I want to go back to, whatever the cultural amenities were.
I think that's why a lot of that movement, or this could be one of those reasons why a lot of that movement wasn't necessarily these wholesale, like state to state changes or anything like that. It was 2 to 3 metros over, because I think a lot of people anticipated that even if they did get called back in, everybody was talking about how, work from home was now going to be a little bit more, flexible in terms of
Mhm.
being able to afford that. So they're like, look, if I have a crappy commute, once a week, twice a week, I'll trade that for,
Yeah, they
my,
could deal with it, meaning.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so they were kind of hedging,
yeah,
yeah. So that's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. Not too far away, but not where I was. Somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So then, also we saw like, that showed up, that exodus out into these peripheral communities showed up in the rental marketplace, but it showed up for sure in the for sale market, right? I think you guys probably the same thing in New Jersey and New York, right? Where people are like selling their unit in Manhattan and they're buying, wherever one would buy, that's sort of out. So that was a big rush. I have a person I know who's like probably in her mid 30s, a reporter, and she and I were working on a story. And so I asked, hey, like, what are you seeing? And she goes, all my friends are buying houses. Like every group of 10, like every 9 of them had bought houses.
Yeah.
I was like, that's interesting. So we dug into that a little bit. And basically what it was that the pandemic, we talked about acceleration, sort of got people off the dime about that, making that house purchase. They're like, oh, like, things really could, like life isn't really like forever, and I better get going. And so she described like a lot of them were like doing anything and everything, beg, borrow, steal to get the down payment, even if they weren't ready, or some were now ready. And then of course, after that, then we had the challenge of, people that were, bidding and overbidding houses. And, a lot of people were like, being shut out of that marketplace. So we definitely saw that in California. The reality for California is we've been in a multi-decade supply constricted, situation, as any high regulatory environment would be. And so that just shows up. I mean, we have, I can't remember the study, but, the top 25 most expensive housing markets in the United States, 18 of them were in California, and all the top 10 were California. And maybe that's changed. That's like probably a year or two old now. But that's just, that's a reality of, of supply constraint, right? Economics 101. In fact, it's funny because we get a lot at the California legislatures, and, we got a wacky government here in California. We're a one party state. It's very lopsided. And all these people are like, oh, we got to do this and that. And I actually love it. There's a whole group of, generally, millennial age, younger folks, YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard, which is the opposite of NIMBYs, not in my backyard. They're like, I love it because a lot of them, not, they're not totally like, all like aligned in this philosophy, but a lot of them are like, dude, just build housing. Let's quit screwing around, man. Like because like some cities will go, well, we're going to let as much affordable housing, or we will let housing be built, but only affordable housing. Yeah. And that will solve the affordable housing problem. And you go, not really, because what you need to do is you need to have enough supply so that wealthy or higher income person can get the unit they want. And then that keeps them out of the unit that they would have taken if they had no choice. And then it's called filtering. So if somebody gets that top unit, then everybody sort of bumped down like one unit or several units. And then the people at the bottom are bumped out of the market entirely. And that's why we have the highest homeless population in any state in the United States. But that's a multi-decade long process. And, it's our regulatory environment. We're seeing a lot of legal changes, so that's good. But I think it will take several decades to recover from that, right? We produce between 80 and 100,000 units a year. And I can't remember the stats, but they're saying we need to be producing something like 200,000 to 300,000 or more a year. In fact, Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies at JCHS did a study of Southern California, and they said, depending on what income categories you look at, we're in a 1 million unit shortfall in the Southern California area alone.
I believe
that the counties that make up SoCal, that's 1 million units, dude. I was like, I read that. I go, that number is almost inconceivable to me. And I've been doing this a long time. We're doing our thing. I even tell people, look, dude, we need a lot of like people that do what we do, a lot of creative solutions, new ways of thinking about it. Cause real estate business isn't exactly like super cutting edge, right?
Yeah.
We got a lot of old school thinkers still, and fine, that's, they're fine people, but I'm like, dude, we got to be, legal changes, different types of capital. I had a conversation earlier today with a guy in Toronto talking about modular housing, 3D printed housing. And I'm really just, encouraged. We want to see this whole coming together of all these different things to ultimately produce, more affordable housing. It's not hard. Like the economic principles are easy. Restrict supply and price will go up.
You read my mind. You read my mind with the 3D printing, because it's a technology that can essentially put in a ridiculous number of livable units very cheaply, very quickly. And the rate limiting step will not be the technology. It will be the regulatory environment. It'll and something that you may run into in California. I don't know. Maybe we're a little bit more. I don't even know the word. We're a bunch of nosy Nancys up here in New Jersey. There's developments that get planned, and what holds it back isn't necessarily the politics in terms of the elected officials. It's all of the rest of the people in the neighborhood, right? And they band together to stop the development.
Those are your NIMBYs.
It's
which,
that is probably the biggest problem that we face, because
one of the biggest reasons that the affordable housing stuff keeps on coming to a grinding halt in this area.
And that's also why the elected officials, maybe sometimes their hand is pressed, because if you do get a unit, or if you do get a development that actually makes it all the way through and they're going to break ground, you actually have to force those affordable housing units on there, because otherwise you might not get another shot for 2 years for another.
Well, I mean, if you're the developer, you're like, dude, I spent all this time and risk and effort, and like what I call the fight, right? You got to fight your way through the thing at several different levels. When you get to that other end of that, you're like, dude, I want to build, and I now got to recover and recoup all the investment that I made. And it happens all the time. I mean, that's development. I had an attorney that worked with us at one point. He's like, being a developer is not for the faint of heart, huh? Like, there's a lot of risk. Like, you might do all this and the project fails. I said, yeah. He's like, dude, I don't I would never do it. And it's challenging. I mean, I've been doing it long enough. I don't get rattled easily anymore, but I also operate our business and, have our teams manage projects in a way that we eliminate, or at least reduce complexity as much as we can to reduce risk, right? Like, we do some things this way and we don't do other things, like buying a zone site versus doing entitlements would be an example of that. And you, after, a period of years, you get really good at that. But, nonetheless, the inherent risk of that is still there. I like the 3D. The modular and the panelized system. I mean, I'll share with you guys. Like, about every 2 years, I go deep down the rabbit hole to call people and, hey, what do you got? Can you look at our units and what's the cost? And every time for last, I don't know, 3 or 4 times I've done that over several years, I basically land that still the modular is more expensive on a per square foot basis than the stick built. I mean, we're still building stick built, man. I mean, 150-year-old technology. It's like, it's almost, it's not defeating. I'm okay with it. Like, I my job is to protect the budget of a project so it's feasible and successful at the end of the day and can be finished and be rented, for families to rent and make make the profit we need to. But there gotta be a different way, a better way to do it. So this 3D printing has been really interesting, and I agree on the regulatory. So what I want to do is, find in the next probably 2 or 3 years a project where we could set aside let's say we got a 5-unit building, in the back or something, and we go, okay, Icon or one of the 3D printing companies come out here, like this is your canvas, and come print these houses. I think we'll get engagement from the cities. Like, I think that they would be encouraged, not all, but some. My biggest challenge is sort of mating up all the subcontract trades that go around the 3D printing. So, of course, the systems, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, foundations, drywall. How do you finish the walls, the roof? How does that work? And I know that, in fact, that's probably the big thing I'm waiting for now. I think the 3D extruded printing systems have been relatively perfected, although they're constantly improving. But now it's how do you integrate the plumbing while you 3D print it? I'm seeing some sort of creative little solutions. Some of the structural components are, it'll extrude and they actually lay a plate in there and extrudes over it now, and that becomes integrated into the system. But I haven't seen it yet now where I'm really like at our level, like, we're just like regular, residential construction technology oriented, and that's our capabilities. And we got good teams, but they do the stuff the ancient ways, if you will. And that's why I want to do this little 5 unit, because I think I could get the subs. I go, dude, just work with us. You do the electrical for that.
Fight through it.
And fight through it. Right. Exactly. Right.
Yeah. And what's interesting is you said, you're still building stick. I mean, in a state that's tectonically active, right? So we're talking about earthquake proofing and all kinds of other stuff. Same deal here in Jersey on the East Coast. I mean, anywhere on the East Coast is still a hurricane risk, right? So, and if you think about it, just kind of like philosophically, a stick house with a bunch of metal bracing, like the tie downs and stuff like that, still isn't the optimal solution. The optimal solution is, a fairly, as close to one piece of a house as you can get, so that there's no points of failure.
That's which the 3D printing is like perfect for that. It's like a continuous wall. It's funny. I'll tell you a story. So we did a lot of business in Colorado and have over the years. And every time I go out there, I walk the framing. It's like naked, right? There's no metal. Like, no, hey, where's your straps? Where's your hold downs? Like, it's not complete. And they're like, no, that's finished. I mean, I figured out after a couple of times, like, this is it. This is how it is, in the non-earthquake, non-hurricane zones, a lot less metal.
Rich people's problems.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Alan, I'll give you the last crack. We're running on an hour here. So what else you got? Did we not hit anything on your list?
Well, I think no, I think we more or less hit everything on the list. I mean, it was, but here's the final question, because this is something that I seem to mention in every single one of these that we have done. And now that we have a developer here, I'd love to hear what you have to say. What are your thoughts on contracts with subcontractors?
It's a good question. In fact, it's something we deal with regularly. So we actually, if I'm understanding your question, so we don't use general contractors. So we're a developer, which normally would hire the general and then they hire the subs. But I have what I call the home builder model. So most big home building companies, the Tolls and the Beezers and all those guys that build like standard residential detached, their companies are like a souped up owner builder, doing direct contracts with all the subs. Like, so the owner LLC or the company, they contract with the framer and do all that kind of stuff. So that's how we do it. And we've done it since 2005. And we've maintained that. Now we incur more costs because obviously it's more intensive to manage the, bidding, like the pre-qualification bidding, contract development. Like I've got, team members who their main job is just to do the contracts, get the insurance, do the loan draws, and then sort of fight through all the invoicing. And, because we're at the level we are in the residential trades, we have to like in some projects we'll do twice a month draws with the construction lender.
Yep.
That's because we need to keep the subcontracts fed, right? They're paying their people weekly. And, I have a background in construction from a long time ago. So, does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah.
I literally hammer home. You need to have contracts with your subcontractors.
Oh, dude.
Because I've worked with enough contractors that they don't do that and they get burned. And when they do, all they do is complain about how it's unfair. And I'm like, well,
it's funny because I have a couple of people, like we sign the contract. So we use our own form of subcontract. And I got all the stuff, oops, I forgot that, better put that in there. Oops, I forgot that, put it in there. And then, we'll attach the proposal to it. And I swear people go, no, dude, it's not that. And we'll pull out the contract and we go, here we go. Oh, yeah. It's like, and I don't like to Like, I don't want to hammer people and make their life
No,
miserable.
it's not fun, but you gotta, as the main guy on a job, you gotta protect yourself.
It's like I tell my field staff, I go, there is nothing worse than not knowing where you are and the cost structure of your project. As a developer, that's like really where I am kept up at night. I mean, like any project, we're managing the budget and, save money here and put it over there and got cost overruns, it's the normal stuff in construction. But, like the subcontractor world, I mean, we all know this. It's like, it's a different ball game for them. In fact, I always loved it. If you want to manage paper, be a GC. If you want to manage people, be a sub. Yeah. Right. And it's so true. And, paperwork, awful. In fact, I have a person on our team. It's literally her job to create the contracts, and she'll even do the invoices for them. Oh, you want to bill this month in the draw? How much do you need? What's your percentage complete? It's like, I'll do your invoice for you. Because I get people that I go, dude, I got twice a month draws. Like, I offer this as a strategic advantage when I want to recruit, new subs. Yeah. And they're like, oh, cool. It really would be good. I go, okay. But now the biggest issue is usually the failure point, I tell them, is your invoicing. Because, man, every 2 weeks invoicing, that comes fast and furious. And I kid you not, you will be calling me in a month going, dude, I'm like going to be 2 days late. And I'm like, no, man, I told you, you got to be ready. That's why we have a person who does it for him, because we had so many failures. And, still the problem is ours, because if they don't get paid and they can't buy the windows and the windows aren't installed, we can't do stucco and, the whole process.
I've worked for subs like that, and I get the phone. What did we do last week? Where are we now? What did we buy? And you're like, wait, what?
Tell me what we did. Where are we at? Yeah, exactly right.
That is, Alan's going to get a tattoo that says "Have a contract."
No contract, no work.
Yes.
No honey, no money.
Well, look, I want to say thank you.
Yes.
Let me give you a softball here at the end. Are you a sports guy or a sports fan, Scott?
I am. I'm actually a college football guy.
Okay. Who's your team?
Well, so it's funny because the joke I made, like, we're from LA, right? So we spent decades without a football team. It used to be, in the old days, was the Rams for NFL, and then they left, and then USC became my NFL team. So people are like, oh, what NFL team you like? I go, dude, I'm from LA, so it's USC. And actually, my oldest son, he goes to USC, so it's been even more so. So the Trojans, and I just love college football because it's it's so much more honest. Yeah. Like, I don't follow NFL anymore, and for both the style of play and just the politics are wacky, and I just I watch NFL a little bit, and it's like too slick, and I know those guys are pros, like I get that, like they train hard and they got it down, but to me college is more raw and it's more real, and you sort of live and die, and these kids are 20, teens and 20s, they're like they're kids, and there's some arguments about them, the NCAA, and they're getting taken care of financially, and I know that's changing, and they get beat up and all those kind of things, but still, that's my go-to sport.
Yeah, no, that's good. I know it is a little bit of a sore spot for Alan because he's a Jets fan, and Sam Darnold didn't exactly.
I'm well familiar
with
California college quarterbacks.
Yeah, had a few through the ranks. Yeah.
Exactly. But it is what it is. I mean, there's not everyone can play national football. In fact,
I agree.
Vast majority, minority of people. So
yeah, very few.
Well, it's good. Good luck to the Trojans this year. Hopefully, they have a decent season.
It'll be interesting to see how coronavirus has disrupted everybody. We're going into season that's like almost unknown. Like like who's good this year, and people are like, I mean, maybe I'm not following all the scouting reports, but I talked to my son about it, and he's like, man, it's going to be wild this year. I think there'll be teams that normally you wouldn't think would compete that'll probably win, and teams that you would think that would win that will be destroyed. Yeah. The disruption is going to be pervasive, I think. So
I would prefer that in college football because, I mean, the old, Alabama, Ohio State,
Yeah, right.
are the last two remaining at the end of the season. Every single season is just like, you need
Yeah,
some
you
parity.
want it to be mixed up a little bit. Hey, surprise me, you say.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to throw Urban Pacific's website up here one last time. Definitely check out urbanpacific.com for more information on what Scott's working on out there in California. And I'm going to throw up one last pitch. If you made it this far and we didn't put you to sleep, like, comment, subscribe, share, notification bell, retweet, share this out there, help us out. Look, Scott, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And hopefully you have a good evening.
Yeah, likewise, guys. Great to meet you, and good conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.